Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for all joining me tonight. You are in the right place if you are curious about the link between fatigue and weight imbalances and digestive symptoms. So, we have a lot of information to go over in the next 30 minutes, and I'm just going to jump in. But I am sending out a recording for those of you who are not here tonight, but for those of you who are here, please say hello to me in the chat box. And in the chat box, if you would love to just tell me one sentence of what brought you here to this webinar. And this could be a question about your health. Maybe you have a diagnosis that you've been given by a doctor, or you are just curious about some things that you've read about on the internet. So tell me if any of these symptoms apply to you. Also, do you experience any fatigue, mood imbalances, irritability, depression, anxiety, weight gain or loss, bloating, constipation or diarrhea, IBS, pain in your abdomen, sugar cravings, or salt cravings? If any of these things apply to you, go ahead and let me know in the chat box. Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for letting me know, and I will try to answer these questions as quickly as possible. And if I don't answer these questions in today's webinar, follow me for future webinars. I will be trying to answer your questions in the future. So, but first I want to get you, before I get into the information, I want to let you know about me. My name is Natalie, and I'm a certified functional nutritional therapy practitioner. And I am also certified in nutrition pathology and functional medicine. So basically what this means is that I understand how the body systems work together and how to address healing symptoms from their root cause of the different systems. And this is mainly done through nutrition and lifestyle change. I also wanted to share 3 things you might not know about me. I studied physics in my undergrad, and I know what it's like to suffer from terrible PMS symptoms, fatigue, diarrhea, and constipation, and other digestive complaints, and other painful symptoms. I actually was dealing with these things while I was going to school in undergrad, and it was after that that I started to do my own research and studies, and pivoted and started to change my education and started studying nutrition. And now I've been practicing nutrition for 4 years, and I've helped hundreds of clients with fatigue, menopause, PMS, Crohn's and IBS, and other painful symptoms. And I help them primarily by focusing on one thing. So I try to keep it simple so that because that's what's worked well for me, actually. So I'm excited to share with you all the link between gut health and fatigue, weight, and digestive issues, how most nutritional approaches fail to support these symptoms holistically, and then I'm going to give you 5 nutritional lifestyle changes that you can implement today. So all of these symptoms are a product of some bigger issue. So digestion is the foundation to all health. And when we use in conventional medicine different tools or medications to help give us energy, help us lose weight, or get rid of pain, we aren't really getting to the root of the problem. And Hippocrates said it first, actually, and he said, all disease begins in the gut. And this is actually very true, as we've been seeing more and more in literature today. So it all starts with something called dysbiosis. And this is just a fancy term that talks about the imbalance of bacteria that live in your intestines. And we refer to the ecosystem that lives inside of your gastrointestinal tract as the microbiome. And it's naturally encompassing trillions of different bacteria, viruses, and other organisms. And we don't even know some of the organisms that exist. The human microbiome study only has mapped out 50% of the microbes that are in our gut. And each individual's microbiome is kind of like a fingerprint. And so it's unique to you. However, we do know that there is a balance of good and bad bacteria. And so unfortunately, in our Western culture, we have an epidemic of loss of beneficial bacteria. And this is according to the Human Microbiome Project study. And when we get this loss of beneficial bacteria, we get an overgrowth of potentially pathogenic bacteria frequently, and then we get a loss of overall bacterial diversity. And this is what contributes to the fatigue and weight imbalances and many other issues that we are seeing in our modern society. So we get our microbiome from our mothers and them from their mothers. This is primarily done through vaginal birth and breastfeeding. And so we're experiencing this generational trauma leading to poor bacterial diversity in our gut because of the insults of our industrialized food system that was first experienced by our grandparents. So our grandparents were the first generation to experience these industrialized foods as well as industrialized chemicals. And now our parents and now us and future generations live in a completely different world with thousands of different antibacterial chemicals that are passed down, not only from our constant chronic exposure in our everyday life, but also through breast milk. And this is how dysbiosis starts, and it leads to something called leaky gut, which is also known as intestinal permeability in the literature. This is kind of what leaky gut looks like. So it is basically an infection in your intestines, and we get holes in our intestines, which allows for inflammation. We can basically say with dysbiosis and leaky gut, we have an infection in the gut. And when we have infections, they hurt, right? They get swollen, they get pussy, they get gassy. And at this point, you might enter any digestive systems that you have. And even if you don't have digestive symptoms at this time, the leaky gut can pass the infection on into other tissues in the body. And so there's a lot of literature on intestinal permeability and cardiovascular risk and diabetes and Alzheimer's because these tissues are now infected and inflamed. So this chronic infection going on can lead to chronic stress, and stress hormones such as cortisol can actually antagonize your metabolism. It hijacks your ability to have vital energy and the efficiency to burn calories stored and new calories consumed. And we get something called insulin resistance at this time. When we have chronic stress, we get chronically high cortisol, and with that, we get chronically high insulin. And the insulin resistance is what leads to these symptoms of fatigue and weight imbalances. So in a sense, insulin resistance, how that's affecting our energy production is really at the core of all of our cells. There's the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses or the energy producers of every cell in our body, and they turn glucose into energy. But in insulin resistance, we get too much glucose, and this leads to a free radical damage production. And so that's oxidative stress that is damaging to the mitochondria and the rest of the cells in your body. So that's what we mean when your metabolism gets broken and you have these issues. And now that we know what's wrong and what's going wrong, now we can talk about why these traditional types of nutritional approaches aren't necessarily addressing this problem. So first off, this is because these diets tend to focus on really difficult to digest proteins from plants and grains and legumes and nuts and seeds. So these foods are especially difficult to digest if you have inflammation in your gut. And when that's because of dysbiosis, plant foods like grains and legumes and even nuts and seeds are really dependent, and even vegetables and fruit actually, they're really dependent on the bacteria to be broken down and digested. And so if you have opportunistic bacteria in overgrowth or potentially lacking in specific bacteria, then you're actually going to have some pain, potentially some more gas or bloating, or some of these symptoms that are related to eating a lot, especially if you're eating a ton of plants or primarily plants. And that's not going to feel very good. And there's actually a lot of some studies, newer studies, like usually people assume that fiber is what you need for constipation or diarrhea. But in a lot of times, actually, fiber is like throwing gas on a fire, especially when there's dysbiosis. And so this is actually an interventional study that showed that more fiber actually increased these different types of enzymes that were inflammatory markers, and had no effect on the diversity in the gut microbiome. So it did not improve microbial diversity with more fiber, which is that's been a traditional assumption from other studies. But what did actually help were fermented foods, and that's something that we'll take away later. So the next thing is that there are a lot of misconceptions about meat being bad for you. But nutritionally speaking, animal protein is one of the most bioavailable, nutrient-dense foods, that it has these essential amino acids, vitamins, minerals, and it can actually be a huge part of the environmental movement, which is what I'm really passionate about also. So this is a study done on regenerative agriculture, and that is a process of grazing cattle or other ruminants with and using their manure to help reseed and build up the soil. And they do this in integration with other farming techniques and produce production. And they actually have a net carbon total of negative, carbon sequestering because of these practices. And if we compare this to a lot of the kind of vegan and vegetarian proteins, which are, there's really not a comparison. I mean, in this study, they did compare, and if you go to their website, they do compare the Beyond Burger to their net emissions, but it's still so much better. They actually have a negative versus Beyond Burger was still lower, but it still was emitting carbon emissions and utilizing other resources in excess. So I like to just break these vegetarian and vegan proteins down a little bit more, because when we think vegan, vegetarian, we often think, oh, that's healthy. But it's very arguable that these types of processed proteins are really not healthy at all. So the first few ingredients, like the pea protein and the other ingredients that stand out to me that are unhealthy, are like canola oil, maltodextrin, natural flavors, sunflower oil, and bamboo. And, this is primarily because canola oil is, it's not specified if it's non-GMO, and if it's not specified, it's bound to be GMO, which is loaded with glyphosate. And glyphosate is an antibiotic, and it has a lot of harmful effects to our gut flora, comparable to the antibiotics that are fed cattle in feedlots. So you're not really doing much better than, with nutrition that way. The pea protein is very processed and contains a lot of phytic acid, which inhibits zinc and iron absorption. And zinc and iron are actually not in excess with the pea protein at all, really. And so we can see that this type of food is really devoid of B vitamins, fat-soluble vitamins, and iron and zinc, which beef normally would provide. And those are essential. And so we really want to, bamboo is also like it's not digestible by humans. And so that's the cellulose from bamboo would potentially cause a lot of harm to an already injured gut. And then the other kind of new type of vegetarian vegan food is the Impossible Burger. And this one also concerns me because of the soy protein. Again, it's probably GMO. It does not specify. So it's likely GMO because most soy is in our country. And that means it's riddled with that glyphosate, which is going to decrease our bacterial diversity. Sunflower oil and other seed oils are known to hijack our metabolism. And so they actually create oxidative stress on our mitochondria and are very, very toxic. And then soy alone, like the soy protein alone, has a lot of anti-nutrients, and these kind of can create a lot of issues with digestion and hormone regulation, and potentially cause immune reactions and can block mineral absorption. So, and then actually the last ingredient here that that's soy, I can't even pronounce it, leg hemoglobin, is very concerning because it's a new type of fermented soy that it's actually what makes the burgers bloody, and they ferment it. But the FDA originally refused to grant it the generally recognized as safe status because it's a type or a food ingredient that has never been in the human food supply ever, and it lacked safety testing. And the original testing actually identified 47 additional uncharacterized and untested proteins in the fermented brew. So if you aren't eating these processed foods on a Mediterranean vegan and vegetarian diet, that's really, really good. And you can probably do pretty well with getting enough protein from whole grains and legumes. And that's a really great place to be if you don't have dysbiosis or leaky gut. But if you likely do, then these diets can still be out of balance and have too much carbohydrates, which would contribute to the insulin resistance that is kind of antagonizing the poor immune function that is harboring this leaky gut in the dysbiosis in your gut. So the carbohydrates from grains and legumes spike the body's blood glucose and contribute to insulin resistance, especially if you're eating all of the time. And snacking is a very common occurrence in vegan and vegetarian diets. So that's why, now that we know what doesn't work, here are some of the 5 nutrition and lifestyle changes that you can start doing now to improve your fatigue and weight and digestive symptoms. The first thing that and kind of the number one thing that I help people focus on is healing the gut. And this is done by improving bacterial diversity through nutritional changes. And when we do this, this is naturally going to lower cortisol and insulin. And it's also going to improve the symptoms that you might have or be experiencing. And in my own experience too, when it comes to nutritional changes, it's really, really important to focus on what to eat instead of what not to eat. And so I pass this on by emphasizing these 4 cornerstones to gut healing, which are adopted from the GAPS nutrition protocol. So the first is meat stock. The second are fermented foods, as we saw in literature up ahead, that really does improve bacterial diversity. The third is non-starchy vegetables, and the fourth are organ meats. And if you don't want to eat organ meats, sometimes I'll have clients actually have supplements that they can purchase with those in them. And you can start incorporating these foods in your diet right now. And when you do that, you're actually it's going to help you avoid the difficult to digest foods, because these foods are very nourishing and satisfying to the body. So this leads me to the second thing that you can do is to increase healthy fats. And these would come from, the 100%, regenerative egg, grass-fed animals, pastured eggs, organic coconut oil, olive oil, and maybe even nuts and seeds. These contain very, very healthy fats, and fats will do a lot of good to help you utilize the stored fat as fuel, or even fat as fuel, comparatively to glucose, which when you're at this stage, you need to have a balance of fat fuel as well as carbohydrate fuel to help reduce oxidative stress on the body. So, and then this actually will help you with this third step, which is intermittent fasting. And so what we eat determines how high the insulin spikes. So when you have carbohydrates and protein, insulin is still released. But when we have fat, that's why we want to emphasize healthy fats in the diet. We aren't going to have as high, or there's not really any insulin that's released. But then when we eat also determines how persistent the insulin is in our body. So it's a really important step to take to start to include intermittent fasting in your diet, because this will actually open up and broaden your diet as and then there's tons of benefits, like improving mitochondrial function. It increases bacterial diversity in the gut when we fast, and it also helps us detoxify and prevent cancer. But it's definitely going to help with improving your diet diversity too. So you might be able to consume more grains or legumes in moderation when we do intermittent fast, because the insulin spike is not going to be as constant. And historically, we just didn't eat as much too. So fasting was practiced more frequently, and it helped us prevent these, these different symptoms of dysbiosis and insulin resistance. So the fourth thing you can do for yourself is, and this might be easier after you've started the first three, is really to cut out the convenience foods and other toxic ingredients in our lives. So the average American consumes about 10 pounds of chemical additives every year, and this has a devastating effect on our health. And the FDA tests for single additives, but no one really has any clue what these additives are doing in combination to our bodies. And so we primarily get these from additives from food, and these are some of them that you would want to avoid. And these are some sugar, different names for sugar that you would also want to avoid. But we also get a huge amount of toxin exposure from our environment, from beauty products, plastics, cleaning products, off-gassing of furniture, clothing, and even chemicals in our water from people disposing of medications down the toilets and who knows what. Cleaning up our environment is an essential step also. And then lastly, I recommend to do an elimination nutrition protocol. And so elimination diets can accelerate healing of the leaky gut which, and that's because there's a lot of, often there's potentially food triggers that are contributing to the inflammation in the gut. And these food sensitivities can be difficult to find out from food sensitivity tests because you can often get false positives and false negatives. And elimination diets are actually the best way to discover which foods are actually causing the problem. And they also allow for an environment so that you can heal and potentially reverse those food sensitivities, because the food sensitivities are just a symptom of the leaky gut in general, in the first place. And then I have my gut healing recipe guide that is a specific elimination diet protocol to help you heal the gut in 30 plus days. And it includes recipes on how to tastefully incorporate these 4 cornerstones of gut healing foods. And normally this gut healing recipe is $19.99, and tonight it's discounted to $12.99. So go ahead and over to the chat box and I'll share my link. And then I also know from experience and just I know how these changes can be very difficult to do on your own. And I wanted you all to know that I offer one-on-one support, which includes a thorough nutrition assessment. We can do stool testing and other lab testing and individualized recommendations to help you specifically with where you are in your journey. Thank you all for joining me, and don't hesitate to email me with any questions.